The weekly Cybercrime and Business podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs delivers cyber risk intelligence solutions that help organizations understand the potential for cyber attacks, determine the impact to their business, and proactively address threats head-on.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hack Surfer's Weekly Podcast. Today is Friday, February 20th, 2015. Joining us for today's discussion, we have Eric Severson, Surfwatch Labs data analyst, Jeff Peters, the editor of Hack Surfer, and I am Matt Lightfuss. I write for Hack Surfer. Stay tuned after the podcast for Jeff's interview with Tsion Gonen. Gonen is the Chief Strategy Officer for Identity and Data Protection at Gemalto, and they talk about their 2014 Breach Level Index report. Kind of taking a look this week, guys, at some of the top news. We had a pretty busy week, actually. I'm going to run through the top 3 targets. You guys can feel free to comment if you wish. First, we're going to start with from looking at the chart, it's pretty much tied. I mean, it was close, but we're going to start off with Big Fish Games. Big Fish Games is a game developer. They recently had some of their online billing systems hacked, and they leaked some customer payment information, addresses, some of their names. So it's kind of like a consumer goods thing, that we saw all throughout 2014, a little bit in 2015. I don't know if you guys saw anything else with that. I mean, that's essentially what happened. There are some particulars. It looks like the attack lasted from December 24th to January 8th. Yeah, and they're not 100% sure who was all affected, but someone actually said that it seems like only a small percentage of the total customers were affected by this. Do you guys see anything else with this?
Most of what we've seen through the last year has been physical point-of-sale attacks, and this sort of online checkout attack that everyone was scared of when internet commerce started has actually been more secure than the stores. But as people start hardening those targets in stores, these online checkouts might become the next best target for attackers coming after consumer goods.
Yeah, and with this particular one, there really hasn't been a lot of information. I mean, it was only announced, I believe, a couple days ago, and the spokesperson just said they seemed a little coy in not wanting to say how many customers it was, because they just said a small percentage of customers, so I got the impression, at least, that they kind of knew the extent of the breach, but they didn't really elaborate too much on it. Yeah, so that was the top story of the week, this Big Fish Games. What else was out there, Matt, that everyone was talking about?
Well, we have two kind of similar stories behind these targets. Clearly, the targets are different, and everyone will understand what I'm getting at with that in a second. But we're going to start with MindGeek. MindGeek is apparently a adult website connoisseur. They own 8 of the top 10 top porn sites, adult sites out there, including RedTube. And RedTube is what made news this week. Malicious content was put onto their website, and when visitors were, checking out the site, they were likely hacked by malicious actors, and it, just kind of caused some problems. I don't know if you guys have anything you want to say about that, about some of the particulars of what happened.
Yeah, well, what happened was they believe that the RedTube servers were actually hacked by malicious actors because there was malicious code put on their main page. Basically, there was a malicious iframe that was invisible to users that was on their site. So if you went to their site on Sunday, RedTube says that the breach happened on Sunday, but they had it resolved by Sunday night. But if you went there on Sunday, there's an Angler exploit kit that used a recent Flash 0 day that may have put some malware on your computer. Yeah, so that's kind of what happened with this RedTube and MindGeek, and a similar thing happened with Jamie Oliver's website. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Matt?
Yeah, sure can. And obviously, a lot of people out there probably know Jamie Oliver's a popular celebrity chef. He obviously has his own website called jamieoliver.com, and that was also compromised with malware. And what was happening, when visitors would go on to the site, they were being shown another website that was embedded into Jamie Oliver's website. This would attack bugs in Flash, Java, and Microsoft Silverlight, and if the attack was successful, it actually potentially could have taken over the visitor's computer. So, we have a couple situations here where there was, from the naked eye, visiting these websites, you would not have probably seen that anything was wrong with it, and you could have been compromised. Those are the top 3 targets this week. There were actually several others, but and we can't talk about everything. But what are we going to discuss this week, Jeff? Did you want to kick us off with something?
Yeah, I thought it'd be interesting to touch on a lot of the financial news kind of stories. It's been a pretty big week, and there's been a lot going on, but I think one of the bigger stories that people were talking about is this New York Times piece, which is based on a Kaspersky report that came out, which basically said that cyber criminals have stolen $300 million from banks, could be as much as $1 billion. So obviously, we're talking about $1 billion in thefts. That's quite a big story. There's over 100 financial institutions in 30 nations over a 2-year period that were sort of involved in this theft. The majority of them were in Russia, but there were, obviously 30 different nations. There are a lot of them in Japan, U.S., Europe as well. It's hard to track exactly how much is stolen because a lot of times they stole smaller amounts. I think the largest was 10 million, but a lot of times they stole much less. The interesting thing in reading this Kaspersky report is they said that the plot marks the beginning of a new stage in the evolution of cybercriminal activity where malicious users steal money directly from the banks and avoid targeting end users. So I just thought that was, kind of an interesting angle, and obviously they did as well, where they're, actually targeting the banks themselves as opposed to, stealing login credentials and, individual accounts. So that's a pretty interesting story. There's a whole lot to it. If you guys, if anyone's reading, wanted to check out, just Google Kaspersky and the Carbonac Cyber Gang. So I guess besides that story, which we just discussed, there's also been a lot of Bitcoin stuff in the news lately. Really the last couple of months there's been, but I know that there was a story this week. I don't know if you know anything about that, Matt?
BTR.com, it's a Chinese Bitcoin exchange. They were breached on Valentine's Day. They had the equivalent of $1.75 million worth of Bitcoin stolen. Not a whole lot of information on it yet. We do know that they are offering 720 Bitcoins, which is the equivalent of about 170,000 US dollars, as a reward to anyone who retrieves the stolen money. This isn't the first time we've seen Bitcoin in the story, in the news. Not long ago it was Bitstamp that we were talking about.
Yeah, and before that it was, there's been a lot. There's been Mt. Gox was the big one, and Bitcoin's been having a lot of these problems. The major exchanges don't seem to have their security act together. I would compare them to regular banks, except apparently they're not doing so well either, as we just saw. So the entire world of, obviously digital currency is having problems, but apparently the entire world of online financials needs to change the way they're doing things, and probably the way they're thinking and approaching things.
Going off that, there was another story this week, the Canadian Bitcoin exchange. I'm not sure how you pronounce this, Cavertex. They announced that they're closing. They put out a statement. They said on February 15th, they found a reason to believe that an older version of their database, including two-factor authentication secrets and hash passwords, was compromised. They said that their customer funds were not affected by the company, and they should be able to cover all withdrawals, but they're going to be shutting down. And they are, I believe, to be Canada's biggest Bitcoin exchange. So sort of another story of a Bitcoin company biting the dust, which we've seen quite a bit recently.
Interestingly, with these, the price of Bitcoin hasn't been too affected. It's still way down from where it was last year, but it's been fairly stable through the last week or two with all this news coming out, which is interesting.
Yeah, and the good news about this Canadian Bitcoin exchange is that at least, customers are going to get their money. We've seen some instances, obviously with Mt. Gox where, people lost out on a lot of money. So I guess there is a silver lining if you want to look at it that way. Yeah, so that was some of the big financial news stuff this week. Like I said, we had a pretty packed week, cybercrime news-wise. There's also some espionage stories that came out that a lot of people were talking about and made a lot of headlines. I don't know, Eric, if you know anything about what's been going on with these espionage groups?
Well, it seems like it's been a big week for Kaspersky Labs. They've put out several reports about these groups. I mean, there's the Equation group, which they stopped just short of saying this is definitely the NSA, but they said they share a lot of characteristics with the NSA. This group that's been apparently active for 14 or 15 years, intercepting hardware and software while they've been shipping, compromising them, repackaging stuff, sending them out. Just really, really sophisticated, hidden firmware corruption in hard drives, for instance, that have been used to attack, finance, government, embassies, research, energy, universities, all kinds of targets that were probably specifically targeted. The good news, I guess, is that this is not an attack carried out on everyone. This appears to be pretty targeted, pretty high value, specific groups or individuals that were targeted, and they say it's most likely a state-sponsored group at the sophistication level of Stuxnet, Flame, and a lot of the big things we've seen, and like I said, the NSA is a good bet. In a similar discovery, same group from Kaspersky Labs, they found what appears to be a cyber espionage group from the Arab world. They didn't specify a country, but it seems to be focused around the Arab world, come from the Arab world. It's called Desert Falcon, which uses phishing attacks, social networking sites, to backdoor organizations, all kinds of things from different countries. And it says they've reportedly stolen more than 1 million files from 3,000 victims in more than 50 countries. This kind of flashy government stuff is rarely the kind of thing that your average person needs to be worried about. These drive-by downloads, flash exploits, a simple phishing email to get your Facebook or banking password. That's the kind of stuff your normal person needs to be worried about.
There was another story this week about espionage, basically tying some espionage to France. It was kind of already assumed that they were involved in this Babar malware. Probably butchering that. But, they were already kind of tied to there, but there was a report that came out basically kind of confirming that. In reading that, they were talking about how it's, not quite at the level of, NSA kind of tools. But they're saying it was fairly sophisticated and kind of a good indicator of what some of these countries sort of like outside the Five Eyes can do. So you kind of got that angle. And then we were talking on this week's critical infrastructure webinar just about, possibly hacktivist groups or other groups kind of coming in and kind of using some of those similar tools to do damage. So I think that's probably the concern that stands out to me is not, obviously the NSA is going to do what they're going to do, but it's, if these other kind of groups can sort of get access to these tools and kind of use them, I think that's possibly one trend that's slightly worrisome.
Yeah, and there's potential for that. I think it's years off, and some of these things require a level above hacktivism. We're talking about mail being intercepted and a router being compromised, then repackaged. Like, Anonymous isn't going to do that. They don't have the resources or know-how for that.
Yeah, so that's some of the top headlines from this busy week of cybercrime news. Moving on, we have a quick cyber tip of the week. There's an article I saw talking about visual hacking, which I think we've mentioned before on the podcast, but I just thought some of the statistics in there were interesting. They found that in nearly 9 out of 10 attempts, a white hat hacker was able to visually hack sensitive company information. And 45% of those attacks, took less than 15 minutes. So I think that's something that's just interesting to point out. We always talk about, like we were just talking about all these sophisticated actors, and everyone's always, worried about all these advanced attacks and espionage and things like that. But an employee at the airport, checking some documents and someone looking over their shoulder is obviously quite a risk as well.
I don't want to put you on the spot. Was there information about what techniques they were using and what people can do to counteract that?
So a couple things that they mentioned in this article, they talk about, having unprotected devices. They say open floor plans pose a greater risk to visual privacy. I know, everyone's always talking about the benefits of an open floor plan, but it says that in an open office layout, an average of 4.4 information types were hacked, while those with a traditional office only saw 3 information types hacked. But then they also pointed out at the end here that visual hacking controls work. And it says companies that had relatively low visual hacking rates had more controls in place, such as mandatory training and awareness, clean desk policies, shredding practices. They reported suspicious activities. They employed the use of privacy filters, things like that. Again, it just kind of all goes back to awareness and making sure your employees, are aware of the threat and kind of know what to do about it. All right, well, that's it for this week. Coming up, we have an interview with Tsion Gonen. He's the Chief Strategy Officer for Identity and Data Protection at Gemalto. They just released their breach level index report, which had a lot of interesting things, and we got a chance to chat with them about that. To kick it off, I know you guys just released the breach level index, and I guess what stood out to me in there is just, the big numbers. It said more than 1 billion data records were compromised. Just wondering if you could give us talk about that number and then give us a little kind of overview of what you found.
Yeah, I think the interesting, obviously the number itself is very interesting, and it's a huge growth from the year before. There's a couple of points that would make this number even more interesting. One is that these are the numbers for records that were breached or stolen or taken or lost in what we found from public information. So these are breaches that were actually reported. So, the average reader should assume that the number for actual records lost is probably way higher. These are the publicly known ones. So the numbers would be even bigger if we actually had all the information. So that's number one. The number two, what's really interesting in these numbers is that there is quite a lot of what we call mega breaches, which is, where the type of the targets, the Home Depots, where there's tens of millions of records stolen, and obviously that means tens of millions of people impacted. And that is very apparent from the numbers that you see in 2014. There's just quite a number of these mega breaches.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering if there's anything that sort of, maybe like surprised you, something you were sort of expecting to see in the numbers, but didn't show up, or vice versa.
The fact that the number is growing, I think everyone in this industry now understands it's not a surprise. I think if you would ask the average Joe, what does he think is going to happen next year, he's probably going to say this is going to continue or grow. People, I don't know if it's good or bad, but people came to sort of accept that this is the situation. What's really interesting when you look at the numbers is that there's way more identity theft focused breaches compared to financial services, which I would say was the almost where everything started. If you recall, if you look at the previous years, also we've been getting this report out for a couple of years now, but there was a lot more financial fraud. So credit card mostly, right? And this year, 2014, you can see that identity-related data loss is a bit above 50%, I think, which is a very big number, which is a surprise and a not surprise looking at it. Again, it was surprising to see the size, I would say, the sheer size, and how big the numbers are. It is interesting to note what caused this thing, and I think what you're seeing is that, I don't know for you personally, but I had to cancel 5 credit cards this year, 2014, last year. Chase just called me and said, sorry, we need to give you a new credit card. And what you see is happening is that the companies are becoming very edgy, right? The credit companies are very edgy. And you probably get calls saying, is this really you making this transaction? Or we think we saw fraudulent transaction, or like I mentioned, you're going to lose your credit card. So what this means to the people who actually try to steal information is that their window of opportunity of using a card is shortening. Not because someone actually prevented the loss of the card, because even though it's really annoying, the window on using the credit card is shortening because people are just becoming edgy, like I mentioned. So the bottom line is that you can, like if you and I were an attacker, when we're building a business case on what type of data to take, then credit card data loss in the US, at least specifically, the value is getting lower because the window of opportunity of using it is smaller. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's interesting that you bring that up because it just seems like an interesting transition to me. I was reading an article on Forbes a couple days ago and about the Anthem breach, and I guess the theme of it was consumers don't even really care anymore, and even though it was 80 million people potentially impacted. So I'm wondering if maybe you think, obviously like with credit cards, it's a little bit of an inconvenience, but ultimately it doesn't impact consumers too much because, there's protections in place. Identity theft seems like something that, could potentially have a much bigger impact on consumers. So I'm wondering maybe if you think, in the coming years, sort of that idea of like breach fatigue that people are having or consumers might be more invested.
That is true. I think the point that you're bringing up on the credit card loss piece has a couple of things behind it, a couple of reasons behind it. One, assuming that we found, we go over our credit card record and we see that there's a transaction there that we never saw. Again, happened to me last year a few times. We call the credit card company, they cancel it, we're okay. Right? Inconvenience, new credit card, it is annoying, but we didn't potentially lose anything. Where it comes, and by the way, the people who are losing stuff is obviously the credit card companies, which this financial fraud costs them a lot of money. And they need to get insured and stuff like that. And that's why they are probably the ones that have the most interest in solving this problem. And I'll touch on it in a second. When it comes to identity, which is a new trend right now, and there's a lot of it, the impact can be very significant. And by the way, different from a credit card, it is very hard to remediate. Very hard to remediate. You can cancel a credit card. But if someone stole your social, what do you do? If someone knows your driver's license number and your last name and your home address and your zip code, they're good to go in a lot of ways. And what do? Give you a new social, right? It's going to be really hard. So I think, there's sort of, I think the combination of sort of breach fatigue. Yeah, I lost another credit card. Yeah, last year, the first time that you got a call and Chase said, hey, change your credit card. You said, okay, that's really annoying. What happened? After the fifth time, you got used to it, right? When it comes to identity theft, the impact can be way more significant. And like I mentioned earlier, it's a great question to ask. I mean, whose interest is it to prevent it? In the credit card fraud angle, the financial institution themselves have a very big interest in preventing that fraud because they are the ones that are incurring the costs. In identity, if Jeff loses his driver's license, who cares except Jeff? And that is a big issue. There's no financial, and by the way, if you look at the history of compliance and regulations, then you could see that if you heard about PCI DSS, right, which is the data security standard, which is probably the most implemented and enforced data protection standard around, definitely in the US, that's been around for a long time. It is not a government regulation. It's the credit card company's regulation because they are the ones with the interest. So it's a good question to ask what's next for identity theft. It's a big issue.
Just looking at some of the numbers here in this study, another thing that kind of stood out to me was you talk about the idea of a secure breach, and I know I've spoken to you about that before, but you said the number went from 1% to 4%. So obviously, that's good. There's improvement on that front, but on the other hand, 4% still seems pretty small to me, especially, when all the people that we interview at HackSurfer seem to keep talking about that idea of, you're going to get breached, you got to do it securely. So just wondering your thoughts on that number.
Yeah. Yeah, so first, 4% to 1% is 400% increase. So that's a good number. That's one way to look at it. I think the numbers are encouraging. I would say if we had in this survey, and let's say an appendix survey that asked people, do they think they need a plan B, which encryption being part of a plan B, I think that the number would be huge in people that say they need it. Just what you alluded to, people are talking about it. They understand that it is unpreventable basically, and they need to get ready for it and minimize the impact. I think where we are right now as an industry, and definitely from a security practitioner perspective, the people who actually need to implement, they're trying to figure out how to do it. And because it's not, Jeff, if you look at a traditional security organization, and let's say for a larger company, and let's say that they have 100 people working for that security organization, and you would ask, how many people do you have that have experience in managing firewalls? You're going to get quite a big number, right? AV people, how many antivirus people do you have? Breach prevention people, how many breach prevention people do you have? You're going to find a big number. Then you go and you say, okay, out of the 100, how many people have experience in Plan B? You're not going to find a lot. This is an industry that's trying to pick up and understand that there's almost like, I started saying a few years back that InfoSec is going through a midlife crisis and trying to understand what's next. And there's not a lot of people in the security industry that can ride a Harley Davidson yet. So I think that there's that evolution. You're going to see more. If you look at the 4%, it's probably going to be 8 to 10% next year and carry on. It's still, like you say, it should be 100, but I'll give you another interesting statistic, Jeff, that I think is really, I just found it out yesterday. So we're very strong in user authentication, right? Which you would say, oh my God, it's 2015. Everybody should know that usernames and passwords are not enough, right? I mean, it sounds so trivial. Encryption might sound complex. Username and password, replace username and password with strong authentication. There's mobile phones, SMS authentication. So I just looked at our numbers, and we're one of the, probably the second largest, number one in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, sell hundreds of millions in this space. And I looked at the numbers that we have last year. 60% of our customers last year are greenfield. Never had strong authentication. We were not replacing anything. 60, isn't that crazy? Right? Like, I was looking at the numbers, I said, I can't believe that there's 60%, and we're selling to big companies that didn't have anything in 2014, 2015. You would think username and password for a financial institution, they would figure out it's not enough, right? So it's an evolution. I think, like I said, the industry is going through a midlife crisis, and it's just figured out that life isn't what it used to be. And now it's figure out what it's going to do.
Yeah, that 60% number is really surprising to me, because I can imagine, especially with like small businesses, they're not going to be, maybe have the most security. But like, on the enterprise level, it just seems like they would definitely have at least something like that in place. I'm just wondering if you have any sort of ideas as to why that is. You talk about this midlife crisis. Is it just a matter of time, or what is it that needs to happen?
Like I said, I think, things happened really fast. If you look 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and I think we talked in 2013. And when we talked about securing the breach and Plan B, I can tell you, I started talking about this even earlier than that, 2010, 2011. I was probably one of the first that said it. And people were still thinking that they're going to be able to prevent and do. And I think what you're seeing right now, the last couple of years, just the sheer amount is bringing awareness to its peak. And it's human nature almost. You need to get hit hard enough and enough times. It's not enough to get hit hard enough. It needs to be enough time to get to the point that someone just goes and says, hey, listen, obviously what we're doing is not working. And until you go through that stage, people just don't go and take action. And another piece that you want to put into consideration is that sometimes we forget, even as vendors, as security solution providers, we forget that when we talk with our customers and we try to, talk them into taking action, they, on the other side, need to go back to their CFO, CEO, board of directors and get budgets to do this stuff. So, so if you look at the chain, and for a lack of a better way to put it, there's the vendors who think everybody should buy everything today, right? There's the security practitioners that think they should buy some of it. And then there's the board of directors, CEO and CFO, which until 2-3 years ago didn't think it's that important. So as a security practitioner, you're sitting there saying, okay, well, I need to do a lot of stuff. I need to choose what do I do first. today, what I'm seeing more and more, and that's why I think, it's a very interesting time in the security industry, and I think that we're going to get out of this midlife crisis. It's going to take some time, but we're going to get out of it better than we came into it, is that everybody's aware right now. And you're seeing that security practitioners, security officers, obviously now when they go to the board of directors or to the CFO and say, hey, listen, we need to invest, I don't think there's a CFO or CEO out there who says, listen, security is not a priority. We're out of the spotlight. I'm a tractor manufacturing company. We're okay. People actually go after Bank of America. They don't care about our IP for our tractor. I think everybody figured it out. Everyone is a target. It will happen to everyone. The reach currently for attackers is close to 100%. They can reach anyone. So, but to summarize and going back to your question, all of these evolutions that we just talked about in a few minutes take years and months, right? Months and years to get to, and it's just that's part of the game.
And another interesting thing from the study was that it's just the overall trend that breaches are getting bigger in terms of the size and also in terms of the severity. And then I was also reading an article the other day in the Wall Street Journal, and the FireEye's chief security strategist, he said that the median time to discover a breach, according to their research, is 209 days, which seems like a pretty scary number, especially at the same time when breaches are getting bigger and more severe, and businesses have all this data. So just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and kind of the concept of dwell time and how long it takes.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's a great point, by the way, to bring up. The industry talks in terms, and it's also part of the evolution. Industry talks in prevention, right? That's where everything started, prevention. Now, FireEyes of the world and everybody else is talking about detection, reducing time to detect. Okay, we're gonna try and prevent. By the way, FireEye is a prevention company more than anything else. But anyway, putting that aside, everybody else is trying to move to detect, because they assume that even if you're really good at prevention, at some point something will happen. We need to detect it faster. And I think that is definitely an area that's worth investing in. I think that the industry will find itself at the end of the day in something that is post-prevention and detection, which is, listen, I have security so built in that I just left nothing open for a breach to happen. By the way, and again, we're in encryption, but encryption is definitely a part of it. Lose the data. Just make sure you lost encrypted data. I'll give you another example, which we, by the way, are not part of specifically, but just as an example of what I mean by that. When the Target hack happened and the Home Depot, everybody were talking about chip and pin on credit cards, right? And they were talking about the fact that if the credit card itself if the terminal itself was a chip and pin terminal and the credit card was a chip and pin terminal, then there would, even if the hacker sat on the point of sale terminal, like he did on the Target stack, he wouldn't be able to do anything because everything was protected up front, like an Apple Pay environment, right? Like you can sit now, I use Apple Pay on Walgreens. You can have a malware now sitting on the Walgreens POS terminal, and you can still not see a credit card because it never passes through anything in the clear. So I think the industry will move from prevention. Now it's moving to detection. It's trying to figure out detection. And by the way, again, like I said, it's relevant. Spend money on trying to find it out as soon as possible. I think that the next stage, and this is what we're focusing at, and I think that the industry is figuring it out to a large extent, but will figure it out more and more in the next 2-3 years. It will understand that it's not about prevention, it's not about detection. It is about all of these, but it's really about, at the end of the day, making sure that you're just not vulnerable. Reducing the vulnerability and the threat surface to a minimum. And I just gave you a couple of examples of how to do that. Now, again, it's an evolution. So there's definitely place for prevention. There's definitely companies should invest in detection, which is what the FireEye strategist is talking about, detection type technologies. I think at the end of the day, though, we should just make sure that even if someone goes through and we didn't detect and he took something, we still can't do anything with it.
Yeah, well, we're running out of time here, so just I guess it's pretty much all the questions I have, unless there's anything else you wanted to touch on quick.
No, I think we covered quite a lot of topics, and we're looking forward to this to see the next trends that we're going to come up in 2015. We definitely think that the identity piece is going to continue and evolve. It will be interesting to see what the regulator does about it, because, like I said, it's hard to understand who actually has interest to do something about this. It's not a commercial interest. And it's going to be an interesting time during 15 to see how does the regulator react to that and what does the administration do about it.
Thanks for taking on the time, Tsion. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks for listening to this week's Cybercrime in Business podcast. As always, make sure to follow us on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you listen. And if you want more information, check out hacksurfer.com and surfwatchlabs.com.